everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my 3-year or long-term review of this Panasonic Lumix G85 with the 12 to 60 millimeter Lumix lens. Actually, I own this camera for over 3 years now. I bought it in September of 2018. It is now January of 2021, so over 3 years I've owned it, and I've kind of had this idea of wanting to do a long-term 3-year review of this camera for the past like 6 months now, and now I'm just getting around to it because I just had other things going on and other video ideas that I wanted to sort out first. About 2 years I owned this camera. It was actually my primary camera for video and photography on my YouTube channel, and just not even when I was making videos, but it was my primary camera that I used for everything. And for the most part I was only using it with this 12 to 60 millimeter zoom lens, which is the kit lens that comes with this camera. Which is an amazing deal, by the way. It only costs $700 at the moment for this, I believe, for the camera body and the lens. And it served me very well for those 2 years until I bought my Lumix G9, which is what I'm shooting this on right now, which ordinarily my G9 is actually my photography camera, and the G85 is my video camera now, my vlogging camera. But since I'm talking about the G85, I'm filming this on my G9 today with the 8 to 18 millimeter Lumix Leica lens. And I just want to say I feel like this was a absolutely fantastic camera to spend almost my first 2 years shooting landscape photography in my videos seriously on, and there's a few reasons for that. First of all, like I just mentioned, budget. This is a very affordable kit here, and it's very capable as well. Again, like I said, it's like only $700 US I think for this right now. I do believe when I bought it a few years ago, it was actually a bit more expensive. I think I paid $800 for it. But all in all, that's still an amazing deal, especially the results that I get from this camera continue to surprise me in most ways. As a photography camera, it was very capable. I've gotten some of my favorite images that I've shot over the past, over almost 3.5 years now with this camera, and this camera and lens combo with the 12 to 60 kit lens with this body, the G85. I've actually gotten some of my favorite images that I've taken in all different locations all over the place. This lens is very versatile. It's a pretty standard zoom lens, a 12 to 60 and micro four thirds, which is a 24 to 120 in full frame. You can pretty much cover most ranges with this lens. I personally found that eventually, as I was shooting landscape photography longer, I wanted something wider, and I also wanted like a telephoto for further reach. In general, when you're first getting into landscape photography, I found this camera with this lens, this combo was kind of about the best you could get for someone just starting out, in my opinion. For the video capabilities, ever since I bought my Lumix G9 in, I want to say August of 2020, so going on almost a year and a half ago that I bought the G9, this switched to become my primary video vlogging camera, paired with the 8 to 18 millimeter Lumix Leica lens. I still use this 12 to 60 is more of a secondary zoom lens for me now, when the 8 to 18 seems to be more of a primary at this point. Especially for vlogging, I get a much wider angle with the 8 to 18, but when I was first vlogging, I was just using 12 to 60. This is the G85 with the 12 to 60 millimeter lens, and this is the G85 with the 8 to 18 millimeter Lumix Leica lens. Pretty big difference. I'm still very impressed with how good the quality of my videos seem to be. I've had people mention, even in comments and stuff, saying that the video quality is really great, and that's the G85. This thing is fantastic. So I'm just continually impressed with what this camera can do as far as the quality that it produces for the price point. The G9 costs a lot more than the G85, and I feel like the increase in quality is not really that much. It's definitely better and has more capabilities, but this is pretty impressive to the point where this is the camera I'm still using for my vlogs almost 3.5 years later. The image stabilization in these cameras are just absolutely fantastic. Not only with the G85, which is what I'm talking about in this video, but also the G9, which I'm filming with. The image stabilization, I honestly feel like my style of photography and videography wouldn't really even be possible without it. Or I'd have to completely change my style if I were to switch to a different system that didn't have as good of image stabilization. I pretty much only shoot handheld for the most part. That's just how I like to do my photography, and honestly my videography as well. I only like to pull the tripod off if I have to use it, so obviously right now I have my G9 on a tripod, but I really enjoy the fact that I can just use this handheld with a steady hand, and I generally just don't use a tripod for 95% of my shots, honestly, that you see in my videos. I don't use a tripod, it's all handheld. The image stabilization is really that fantastic on these things. It just makes everything so smooth, and if you need a little extra help with that, while you're editing a video or something, there's a little bit of wobble, you can always use like a warp stabilization tool in Adobe Premiere Pro, which is what I do on some of my clips if I need a bit more steady. But without this image stabilization built in these cameras, I wouldn't be able to get the results that I get with my videos and also my photos. I will very often do long exposures of up to a second or a second and a half or something like that, handheld, and the images come out still very sharp and not blurred, and I don't feel the need to use a tripod for that, which this completely changes my workflow as a photographer. If I had to pull out a tripod every single time I wanted to do a slower shutter speed, it would just slow everything down, and I'd probably miss shots if I was doing that. But again, that's just my style. I prefer shooting handheld, and these cameras allow me to do that. So the G85 is fantastic with the image stabilization. As far as weather sealing and ergonomics, for me, the weather sealing is an absolute must. I mean, I shoot landscapes out in backcountry and different places like that, in the mountains here in Colorado and elsewhere, and sometimes you get stuck out in the rain or the snow or whatever conditions you're shooting in, or you're shooting by a waterfall and your camera's getting soaking wet, or you're shooting again like in the pouring rain, and I literally never worry about these cameras getting wet. They have gotten soaking wet on so many occasions I couldn't tell you, and they are completely fine and still work as they did when they were brand new. Something I've always said with these Lumix cameras that I use is that they really feel like this camera was meant to be held and used with your hands on a daily basis. They just designed it in such a way that the ergonomics just work out very well. Like, it's very comfortable to hold my hand. I never feel like I'm going to drop it. It's very grippy. There's a really deep cut in here, so your fingers can slide in there and just hold it very well. I personally feel like the G9 has even better ergonomics than the G85, but the G9 is a slightly bigger camera as well, so a bit more compact, but the ergonomics are still fantastic, and I wouldn't really have anything to complain about with it. The button placement, I feel like, is pretty good, and once you kind of learn it and get it set up how you like it with custom settings and such, you probably won't mess with much at that point. Like, I don't touch anything on this camera for like years. I've had it set up the exact same way once I get it set up how I like it. I will say, this was true when I first made the review for this video a year and a half ago, and it still stands true today. My only gripe and complaint with this camera, which for me I've found many workarounds to where it's not really a problem anymore, and that's why I love it so much and I've kept it, is the autofocus. The autofocus is definitely not quite up to par as what I would like. So sometimes when I'm vlogging, you know, it might kind of lose focus on my face for a second, but overall I feel like I have it set up in a way that it works pretty well with the face recognition and tracking like that. I feel like it does kind of keep focus on me pretty well, but there are times when I'm shooting that I'll actually switch it into manual focus just to make sure that the focus does not come off of what I want in focus. So right now, like if I'll have it set on the tripod, I will set it into manual focus, and I will set the focus manually to make sure that it just stays locked on my face, and then I don't rely on autofocus at that point. But I use autofocus a lot as well. Like all the times I'm vlogging in my videos, I'm using autofocus, and it seems for the most part to do pretty well. That's the only thing about this camera I feel like is lacking. His autofocus could just be a tad better. One more thing, speaking of the 4K, this does not shoot in 4K 60 frames per second, so you can't really do any like slow motion footage with it because it doesn't, the highest it shoots is 30 frames per second at 4K. The G9 does shoot at 4K 60 frames per second, so you could potentially slow your footage down, do some more slow motion stuff with the G9, but G85 cannot do 60 FPS in 4K, so that's something to keep in mind if that's something you're looking for. Anyway, I said it before in the first review I did of this camera, and I'll say it again now, I'm very happy with this camera. I don't have a lot of complaints with it other than the autofocus issues, maybe the crop at 4K, which is understandable that you would have that limitation on a cheaper budget mirrorless camera such as this. Probably the last video I make talking about some of the stuff with this camera, because I feel like I've covered it. I've used it for 3 years, I'm still happy with it. I'm still probably going to be using it for a while longer, and yeah, if you guys also own a G85, let me know what you think about this camera. If there's maybe some things that I didn't talk about that you've noticed about owning it, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear about it, and I appreciate your guys' feedback. And if you want to see more examples of this camera in action, then all you have to do is just watch all my videos, because they're all shot with this. So if you're curious to see what the G85 is capable of doing, you could probably just watch my videos, and yeah, subscribe to my channel down below if you want to see more landscape photography videos filmed with this, the Panasonic Lumix G85. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.